You know that feeling when you're watching footage of war? Explosions, marching soldiers, the roar of fighter jets overhead? And instead of horror, you feel something else? Something almost like excitement? Like a pull in your chest you immediately feel guilty about. Maybe you've never been anywhere near a battlefield. Maybe you'd never say it out loud. But the pull was there. And here's the thing, you're not alone, and you're definitely not broken. But some people don't feel just a passing flicker. Some people spend their entire lives chasing that feeling. They enlist the moment they're old enough. They argue for every military intervention. They watch war documentaries the way other people watch romantic comedies. They feel most alive when things are at stake. And what most people assume is that these people are simply violent, disturbed, dangerous. But that assumption misses something so fundamental it completely changes how we understand conflict itself. And honestly, how we understand what it means to be human. Hey, I'm Martin. If this is your first time here, welcome. And hit subscribe if you want more psychology content that actually goes deep. Let's get into it. So here's what loving war looks like from the outside. You know this person. Maybe they're the friend who lights up during every geopolitical crisis. The uncle at Thanksgiving who gets noticeably more animated the moment someone mentions military history. The colleague who talks about the grind and the battle like every project is a siege. From the outside, they can seem intense, aggressive, even a little alarming. But from the inside, it feels like clarity. Like the noise of ordinary life, the monotony, the ambiguity, the endless gray area of modern existence just disappears. There's a mission. There's an enemy. There are stakes. And suddenly you know exactly who you are and what you're supposed to do. And here's what nobody tells you about that. That feeling isn't bloodlust. It's something far more ancient and far more understandable than that. What's actually happening at a neurological level is that the brain is experiencing what psychologists call an extreme stress inoculation response, combined with something researchers have started calling identity crystallization. Here's the plain version. Under genuine threat or perceived high stakes, the brain floods itself with cortisol and adrenaline. But in people with certain nervous system profiles, that flood doesn't feel like panic. It feels like focus. It feels like home. The psychological term for this is stress-seeking behavior, and it shows up in combat veterans, extreme athletes, emergency responders, and this is the part most people miss entirely. In people who've experienced chronic childhood unpredictability, because if your early environment was chaotic, your nervous system didn't learn calm as its baseline. It learned alert. It learned ready. Calm for these people doesn't feel like peace. It feels like the quiet before something goes wrong. And here's where it gets really interesting. Because this isn't a modern glitch. This is evolution doing exactly what it was designed to do. For the vast majority of human history, the people most likely to survive weren't the ones who could tolerate long stretches of boredom and routine. They were the ones whose nervous systems could mobilize fast, stay activated under threat, and, crucially, find that activation rewarding enough to do it again. Research from the University of Zurich found that combat veterans show elevated dopamine release in response to threat-associated stimuli, even years after their service ended. The brain had been trained to associate danger with reward, with meaning, with community. Think about what that actually means for a second. War, for certain nervous systems, isn't trauma. It's the environment they were biologically and experientially shaped for. And the rest of life, like the desk job, the school run, the mortgage paperwork, that's the thing that feels wrong. But here's the cost of that, and it's one nobody talks about honestly. When the only environment that activates your full self is an extreme one, ordinary life becomes almost unlivable. Research published in the Journal of Traumatic Stress found that many veterans returning from combat don't just miss the camaraderie, they miss the feeling of being fully switched on, of mattering unconditionally, of having a role so clear it needed no explanation. And when that's gone, what fills the space isn't peace. It's a kind of gray, formless discomfort that looks a lot like depression, but is really something closer to sensory and identity deprivation. The brain is searching for the signal it was rewired to need, and it can't find it in the checkout line at the supermarket. That discomfort doesn't just affect veterans, it affects anyone whose identity became fused with conflict. Because this is where it gets personal and a little uncomfortable. Most people who love war don't think of themselves as someone who loves war. They think of themselves as someone who values strength, who respects discipline, who can handle what others can't. They wear the attraction to conflict as a personality trait. Toughness, resilience, a high threshold for chaos. And this is what psychologists call the personality illusion, mistaking a nervous system adaptation for a character identity. Because here's the uncomfortable truth. When you've been activated by danger so often that it feels like your nature, you start defending that activation. You seek out environments that reproduce it, arguments, crises, debates that escalate into conflicts. Not because you're violent, but because your system is looking for the conditions under which it knows how to function. And if you've ever wondered why some people seem to create drama wherever they go, why peace makes them restless while chaos makes them sharp. This is why their brain is running a program written for a world that no longer exists. So here's where most people go completely wrong when they try to address this. The number one intervention people reach for is suppression. Don't think about war. Don't watch the documentaries. Don't let yourself feel that pull. Channel it into something productive. Go to the gym. And this feels logical. It is neurologically almost entirely useless because suppression doesn't retrain a nervous system. It just adds a layer of shame on top of the original activation pattern. Research by James Gross at Stanford, who pioneered the study of emotional regulation, found that cognitive suppression of emotional responses actually increases physiological arousal rather than decreasing it. Trying to think your way out of a somatic response is like arguing with a fire alarm. Your nervous system doesn't care that you know it's a drill, it's still screaming. What actually works is something called titrated exposure to low stakes meaning, which sounds technical, but the idea is simple. The brain isn't craving war. It's craving the conditions war produces: mission, clarity, stakes, brotherhood, the sense that what you do matters right now. And those conditions can be manufactured incrementally in environments that aren't lethal. Research on post-combat reintegration by Jonathan Shay, a clinical psychiatrist who spent decades working with Vietnam veterans, found that the most successful transitions weren't people who tried to forget war. They were people who found context that reproduced its psychological architecture at a survivable scale. Emergency medicine, wildfire crews, competitive team sports, organizations with genuine missions and real accountability. The nervous system isn't picky about the specific danger. It's picky about the quality of the experience, the aliveness of it. The other piece that actually moves the needle is what's called narrative reauthoring. Working, usually in therapy, sometimes through writing, to separate the identity from the adaptation, to say, This heightened state I've been living in isn't who I am. It's what I needed to become to get through something. And now I have a choice about what I become next. And that's maybe the deepest thing here. The people who love war aren't fundamentally different from the rest of us. They're people whose environments wrote particularly loud instructions into their nervous systems. Instructions that said, danger is where you belong. Clarity lives in crisis. You are most yourself when everything is on the line. But instructions can be rewritten, not by suppressing them, not by shaming the person who carries them, but by understanding them completely for what they actually are: a survival strategy that worked once and is still running, long after the war that made it necessary has ended. You're not a war lover. You're someone whose nervous system learned to love what kept you alive. And learning to live without it, that's not weakness. That's the hardest kind of courage there is.